Hello, Jim. It's good to see you again.
Hello, nice to be back.
Yeah, I didn't realize it. I meet so many people, I lose track of
Yes.
who I've met, clients, all of it. So bear with me. I'd forgotten that you'd been on a couple years back, but let's get you reintroduced to the audience anyway. So why don't you open up with who you are, how you ended up here, and what your background is.
Okay. Well, my name's Jim Hoorman, and I'm live in Northwest Ohio, Hancock County, just south of Findlay, a little ways, a little town south of called Genera, south of Findlay. Have a small farm here, about 40 acres. Grew up in Putnam County, Ohio, which is just west of here, about 30 miles. Went to Ohio State, had a bachelor's in animal science, and then got two masters, one in business and a master's in agriculture economics. Ended up becoming a county extension educator for 24 years with Ohio State University. Then spent about 4 years as a farm manager in between two different gigs with Ohio State. And then also went and worked 3 years as a soil health specialist, national soil health specialist, kind of at the regional level for NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Then I started my own company, and just recently here, about a month ago, I'm doing some part-time work for Hoganex, which is a biological company that sells one product, Bio 800 Plus. So that's kind of my background. Have a very small farm, just 40 acres. Have a son, got married just a year ago, and his wife, Maggie, Jonathan and Maggie. And we have just 40 acres here on our home farm. Have raised a little bit of some livestock at one time, don't have anything currently. So that's kind of my background, a little bit about what I've done last some years.
Yeah, no, that's a great resume. So let's talk about the soil health metrics.
Okay.
A lot of people get confused when you start talking about soil health. They're like, well, what do you mean? And so I would love to hear your interpretation of it. I have my own, but
I should probably, there's probably a textbook definition, but when I think about soil health, it's really about all the living organisms and their byproducts really that's in the soil. So kind of starts with the microbes, your bacteria and your fungi and your protozoa and nematodes. It seems like when we get in crops, when we have that nice balance of fungi and bacteria. We should be about 50-50 by weight, not by number, because bacteria are just so small. They vastly outnumber anything else. But when you get to about 50-50, that's when your crops really grow well. And generally, you got to have some protozoa in there because they're going to eat the microbes and make especially nitrogen more available to the plant. They basically poop out urea, which is a combination of basically the ammonia form, and that turns into nitrates. So that's how we feed a lot of our crops. And then a lot of those bacteria are making all the other micronutrients available. The fungi, what they do is they're like freight trains. They just feed the microbes and then bring back a lot of the nutrients, including water and phosphorus and micronutrients back to the plants. That's your mycorrhizal fungi. But it's not just the living part. There's so much of the dead, the soil organic matter, that active carbon. We got the long-term carbon that's been around, the humus, that's been there for tens of thousands of years. But even that's breaking down with tillage. So we kind of want to avoid the tillage. We've really degraded our soils in the last couple of years. But what's really exciting now is we're really starting to get into biologicals, which include all the living that I've mentioned. But now we've got enzymes and hormones and amino acids that we're doing, and also the humic acids, the fulvic and the humic acid, and the humans. And so, and then of course we also got sugars and we got the kelp. So boy, there's a whole probably a week's worth of talking right there. So.
Amen. Yeah. So yeah, in my mind, it's the ecology. It's the whole thing in soil.
Right. How they all fit together.
Yeah, like I have done so many projects over the years where you can actually like literally watch these degraded, farms or soils just come back in such abundance. And a lot of times it starts with the weeds or the indicator plants. And I just try to stress to my clients, like, all you have to do is just weed whack them, leave the roots in the ground. Chop and drop, because that plant has brought up all the nutrients that the farm is starving for, and that they're indicating you're short on these minerals or miners. So that's where, and then you see the worms come back and the bugs come back and the birds come back and the pollinators come back, and then you have a total ecology. Now, it's always been a real challenge for me is to teach people how to see.
Yes.
They don't know how to look and observe anymore.
Right.
And so I love the story of, and I've got many of them, but this one woman in particular, Jeannie, she's a dear sweetheart. And her husband was, taking care of the maintaining the plants in the little garden that they had. But he was purely synthetic. So when he and I met, George, I explained to him that the synthetics are the problem, and here are the solutions. And I did a demo for him. I did 3 applications on his property: one biological in spring, a food in summer, and then another biological in fall. And I stopped by because I love to, see the handiwork, what happened when I come back. And this was, early to mid fall. And I just was standing out in her yard looking around. And she sees me and she goes running out. She goes, "Oh, hi, lady. Thank you so much. Everything looks great." And I said, "Yeah, it does, doesn't it?" And she goes, "Well, what are you looking at?" I said, "Well, look at the grass." And she did. And she goes, "Wow, it's kind of moving." And I'm like, "Yeah, those are all the bugs, right?" And look around, look at the birds and the butterflies. And she was just like, "Oh my God." And I said, "Look at the color of your flowers. Look how many blooms you have."
Yeah.
He goes, "Leighton, I noticed that when I cut my flowers now, I can leave them in the vase for 2 to 3 weeks before they die."
Yes.
That's the biology, honey. That's the plant being super strong. But I had to point it out to her. Like, do you have a similar problem with clients that you have to like teach them how to look again? Or see?
Oh, yes. Yes. And there's so much that's come in. Sometimes you forget it yourself, but just as you were saying, more blooms, that's calcium and could be boron, because those two, when I talk about nutrients, I talk about them in groups, but calcium is such a major element. It's one of the top 3. It's nitrogen, potassium, and calcium are really the top 3. The reason we talk about phosphorus so much is just because it gives us maybe a little bit bigger yield bump, but calcium is just so important. And you got to have boron's a bust to getting calcium in the plant. So a lot of times you could have plenty of calcium in your soil, but if you don't have enough boron, then your plant's not. But you were just talking about blooms. One of the things that calcium does is it promotes 2 types of hormones: the yield producing, but also the growth. So you get more growth, and then you get more yield. You'll get more blossoms. You'll get more roots. You'll get thicker stems, and the quality of your fruit and the quality test weights go up when you have adequate calcium in the plant. So calcium is probably one of the top 3 that we ought to be spending a lot more time talking about. That's how important it is.
100%, dude. 100%. And the other piece of that too is, before I go on, do you have a preferred calcium to boron relationship?
I not so much calcium to boron because they'll tie each other up. There's a ratio. I don't try to memorize those ratios. I have it written down somewhere when I look at soil tests. But the big thing that I look at on boron is a lot of our soils are like 0.3 to 0.5. And what I have seen is when you get above, now this would be in a kind of a more of a clay or loamy type soil. I like to see a minimum 0.7, if not even closer to 1 part per million on boron, because I see often we'll see deficiencies with calcium. Calcium, when you've got small leaves at the top of the plant, that is a sign of calcium deficiency. It may be that you got plenty of calcium in the soil, but if you don't have enough boron to get it in there, so you got to look. And one of the ways you can tell on corn is you look at what I call little railroad tracks on the leaf. And when you see, now I'm going to make sure I get this right because sometimes I forget. When you see little railroad tracks on the outside and then you see it on the inside, the outside, if I remember right, is boron deficiency. You'll see just like little parallel lines right along the edge of the leaf. That's boron deficiency. And when you see it on the inside, that's calcium. And so, and hopefully I got that right. I got to look back at my notes. If not, it's just the opposite. So sorry about that. You know, when you're put on the spot, sometimes you kind of forget those things. Usually I got pictures up and I can look right at them and I can see them. So I apologize for that. Something that I don't always think about every single day. So, but yeah, it's an easy way to look at it. And calcium deficiencies, typically you'll see small leaves at the top of the plant. That is something that calcium is noted for, a lack of calcium.
And again, thank you for sharing that. It doesn't matter if you got it backwards or not. It's a piece of information that they can research further.
Yeah, and you can research that real easy. It's very important. And one of the things that we don't talk about very often is something that I've been seeing a lot lately is our soybean yields just aren't very good anymore. They're kind of topping off at about 65 bushel is about the highest that most people get. Now I see some guys getting 75. And I've talked to guys that are getting 100, but it's interesting. The ones that are getting 100 bushel have something in common. They're using conventional soybeans generally, and they're reducing the amount of Roundup they use. And something that we're finding out that Roundup chelates or ties up anything with a 2+ valence on it. So when you start thinking about that, calcium has a 2+, zinc, manganese, iron, all have a 2+ valence. And sometimes I think what's happening is if we overuse Roundup, I typically see some diseases starting to pop up later in the growing season. And it's a whole slew of diseases. And if you actually look in the literature, Phytophthora, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, Sclerotinia, Fusarium, all are enhanced whenever they're not caused by Roundup, but Roundup will enhance some of those diseases. And I think when we over apply Roundup too much, one of the things I know that Roundup does is it changes your microbial community in the soil. And you'll actually get more aerobic bacteria, which sounds like a good thing, but the anaerobic bacteria are kind of like a double-edged sword. A lot of them cause disease, but the majority of those also are the ones that make our nutrients available in the right form. So how do we keep them in balance? That's when you have plenty of protozoa and fungi out there and nematodes, and they kind of keep them in balance and everything works really good. But when you don't have that, well, then you got a little bit of a problem. And my wife's just coming in the door, so I might introduce her when she comes by.
Sure. Hello, wifey.
Just getting off work here. So. There she is. That's Marlene. Just wave at him. Say
Hi,
hi.
Marlene.
Hi. Going through.
So you brought up a really great point that I love to talk about, facultative anaerobes.
Yes.
And anaerobes too. I mean, our stomach digests in an anaerobic condition. That's how we get our food.
Yep.
So for people to say, oh, no anaerobes, I like to say that, look, in nature, there are always anaerobic pockets. And I did this great experiment when I was down in Rodale with Elaine, Dr. Elaine Ingham.
Yep.
Soul passed recently. Where I took a plant and I kind of pried it out of the ground and got what's called the rhizosheath. So it's just this big network of soil and roots all massed together. And people typically like look at that as, oh, well, that's a root ball. No, it's really called a rhizosheath. There's just all kinds of living organisms in there that's helping hold the soil to the plants. And I took a knife, a steak knife, and I cut it right in half, right down the middle. And then I took different pockets of it and put it under the microscope because I was a student. I was just really curious about, all these different organisms. I now learned to identify them. I'm not saying I'm an expert on determining actual bacterial species, but you can definitely tell when you have an anaerobic soil. Not only does it smell bad, but you'll typically see more of a facultative protozoa, like stalk ciliates or stem ciliates. You'll see root feeding nematodes. See other indicators like pathogenic fungi, not the real big brown or healthy saprophytes. So I went back to Elaine. I said, Elaine, I cut this root ball in half and I tested all these different areas of it. And I found, a lot of anaerobic pockets in the soil. And you constantly talk about aerobes. Don't talk to me about facultative anaerobes, or don't talk to me about anaerobic bacteria. And I'm like, well, isn't that kind of like you're missing half of the story?
Absolutely.
You're not really kind of looking at it. I mean, I know you don't want to make an anaerobic tea or extract and then put it on an aerobic soil. You're going to set it back, right? But I get that. But one of the things I went to her with was fish mold or fish poop, whatever you want to call it. Yes. And there's a lot of stalk ciliates and what are those things called? Paramecium and other, indicators of, pocket or breach of anaerobic conditions. And I'm showing you that through aerobic stabilization, we can get out all of these incredible amounts of aerobic protozoa. And yet it starts in an anaerobic condition. So all I'm doing is aerobically stabilizing it to get it to a point where you love it when you see it. You rant and rave to me about how amazing this really is. So what's the balance? And we got into one of the most incredible conversations. I mean, we went down the rabbit hole for 2 to 3 hours. And came back that, she's like, well, Leighton, as a teacher, as a respected PhD and honorary, person who brought the soil food web to the masses, I have to be so careful about what I do because there's so many big industries that this is disrupting. Having these conversations about you don't need nitrogen, you don't need phosphorus, you don't need potassium. They're in the soil. You just need the biology that will mobilize it and make it plant available. And so I have to walk this very tightrope to not expose myself to a way that they can turn it around against me, because she had that happen in with one of her grad students. Who tried to ruin her and came very close.
So I would just have to say there's really not very many, if any at all, bad microbes. It's just you want to keep them in balance. And if you keep them in balance, that's when everything just thrives. But boy, trying to keep that balance sometime, the things we do to mess it up, the tillage, the more we till the soil, the more anaerobic lack of oxygen we have in that soil. And unfortunately, then the anaerobic bacteria go nuts, and that's when they become diseases. But if you got some good protozoa and nematodes out there, and even some good fungi, they all certain ones of those, all of them will eat the bacteria. I mean, a protozoa can eat 10,000 bacteria in a day and release some good nutrients back to that plant root for it to take up. So it's a natural cycle. You just don't want to mess with it. That's the problem. Don't want to mess it up. And unfortunately, we've done that over the last probably 100, 200 years here in the United States. And our soils are becoming degraded because of that. And I don't know at what point we go over the tipping point. I think we've got a little time yet, but all you have to do is look at South America. They had the worst soils, oxisol soils. A lot of those are sandy, kind of worn out soils. And they've been using no-till and cover crops for the last 25, 30 years. And they're building their organic matter, and they're now where they're number one in soybeans, and they're third in corn, and pretty soon they're going to overtake us in corn. They just have so many acres there. They have about the same amount of acres we do, but they're going to probably add another 50%. About 25% of their land is in production. They're probably going to add another, let's just say another 25% added to that. So about half of their land will be in production here in the next 20, 25 years. And they're going to just outdo us here in the United States. But they're doing it naturally. I mean, in a way, they're turning those forested ground. I hate to see it, but they are taking that forested ground and turning it into prairie ground. That's what's happening. They're getting their organic matter levels up 3%, 4%. Some of them have 5% now, and they're turning it from a oxisol soil into what we call a mollisol soil, which is very similar to our prairie soils. That's what our prairie soils are. And they're just doing that by keeping something living and growing on there year round. Instead of the trees, which live mainly above ground, now they got all those roots growing below ground. And that's where the microbes hang out. So,
I love the pictures of New Mexico back in the early 1900s, where
yes,
you have the gentleman on horseback, and all you could see was from here up because the grasses were so high.
So high, yeah.
And the soils were so deep and rich.
Yes.
And then we plowed it, and because of the humidity or lack thereof, without having those tall plants, they couldn't pull the moisture out of the air. And once those tall plants were gone, the dew didn't collect anymore. The plants weren't harvesting, water out of the air or atmosphere. And now you go to New Mexico, it's a dust. Well, not a dust bowl, it's a desert.
Well, and it's a lot of rock because a lot of it either blew away or when it does rain, which it doesn't happen very often, but if it does, it comes down in torrents and washes it away. They did an interesting study. They looked at the drought in the 1930s, and that study said that drought lasted 4 years longer than it needed to. And if you remember back in the you wouldn't remember, but if you look at history, we're not that old, but we look at history, that's when they started plowing up all the prairie ground. And when they did that, they changed the water cycle, but they also changed how many microbes they were putting up into the atmosphere. And something that they found out here just recently in the last 2-3 years, they found that there's like 67 different species of Pseudomonas bacteria that go up into the atmosphere when we have evapotranspiration. And that's what helps it to rain. They used to say it was the dirt particles, but it's actually the microbes on the dirt, on the soil particles that freeze, and that allows it to rain. Well, if you don't have that going on, guess what happens? All that water builds up in the atmosphere. And now when it rains, it may, instead of coming down in a 1/2 inch, 1 inch rain, all of a sudden we'll get 3, 4, 7, even 11-inch rains, and some of it may not even hit land. It may go over the ocean and pour down in the ocean and doesn't do us any good on land.
Oh, I love that. That this is a great conversation.
Yes, we just recently came back from Belize. We were in Belize in October, and my wife and I went out on a mini safari, I guess, whatever you call it. It was by boat, but we were looking for wildlife. They were showing us different things, and I said, well, we're going to be out there. We better take our raincoats along. And there was a chance of rain. So we went out, and right at about 3 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock, just about every day in the tropics, they will get a 1/4 inch to maybe as much as a 1/2 inch rain. And the reason that happens is because they get evapotranspiration, and all those microbes that are on the leaves and on those plants go up into the atmosphere. And when they reach a certain altitude up there, a certain height up in the clouds, it'll start to rain. And almost every day, right around 3:30, they'll get a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch rain if you have plenty of microbes. But if you don't have the microbes, guess what? Now you get the big heavy rains, or you get none at all, and it goes out over the ocean, and we lose that. So we've broken that natural cycle a little bit, and unfortunately, that's how they're starting to. You might think, well, in the tropics there in South America, one of the things they're doing is they got something living and growing on the land year round. So they'll plant corn or soybeans, and then they'll interseed cover crops into that, and they get about 60 inches of rain a year. So everything just grows like crazy. And that's how they keep their organic matter.
In Florida and Virginia and a lot of the South that they get that 3 o'clock rain.
Yes.
Every day. And like you said, it's not big, but it's enough to keep the cycles going.
Right.
And I think, I think we've all experienced, or most of us, after it rains on a hot day, that smell, that beautiful smell, that is the Pseudomonas. That is that bacteria. Absolutely. Drying out and evaporating and becoming, a fragrance.
Yep. One of the things they have in the Southeast is they got a lot of trees down there, and those trees kind of give off microbes themselves. They made a major discovery. If you go into Kansas, you got West Kansas and you have East Kansas, and the western part is very, very dry. But as those fronts come across, when they hit the river, there's a river that kind of divides Kansas, and there's a layer or a row of trees right there. And they think that actually helps to get the moisture out of the air, that East Kansas benefits from that, because that will spread some of that water and bring it out of the atmosphere and spread it onto the land. So it's kind of like a dividing line there between West Kansas and East Kansas. So having that vegetation on the soil not only improves the soil, but it also has a big effect on the carbon cycle and on the water cycle.
Dude, you hit the nail on the head. And if anybody has a heat gun, I dare you to go out and shoot the bare soil. It's going to be in the 100, 120 degrees, cooking. And you shoot a cover crop, and you go on between the cover crop and you get down that soil, room temperature, cool, 50 or 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yes.
And so with that heat, you're creating what's called convection, which is pushing the heat up and pushing the clouds away from you. And that's a lot of the reason why, the Midwest or the big farm belts are so starved of water now. It's because they're not cover cropping. Right. And keeping the soil shaded and even understory cropping. Yes. It's another really good thing to do. And unfortunately, we don't practice that because we're so focused on yield and money instead of rebuilding our soils and building for the future. It's like it's like investing in stocks. If you understory your corn, with clover or your beans with clover, whatever, something that's a low growing, like a creeper, that can make a huge impact on next year's yield. And
Yes.
then if you keep doing it, it just gets better and better and better. My buddy Kyle, who's both a client and a dear friend at this point in life, is doing corn and beans in Illinois, just a little bit west of you.
Mhm.
And he got 80 bushels for the beans, and he hit
Mhm.
250 on his corn last year because he's been doing biologicals for 3 years.
Yes. Yeah.
And he actually a year ago called me panicked because he had cover cropped with winter wheat, and it was high enough that it was high enough that it was going to be a problem with the beans.
Mhm.
But when he tried to roll or crimp it, it just stood right back up. So he's like, I have to till, and I'm like, Kyle, it's okay. You're building right now. You're
Right.
rehabilitating. It's okay. So I said, just raise the discs as high as you can. Don't full on till it. Just get those discs to maybe 1 inch, 2 inch max, because you don't want to kill all of your mycorrhizae.
Right.
And so he goes, but I have bumps, and there's going to be parts where I don't quite kill the crop. I said, dude, you run that tiller over it, even if it's off the ground, it's going to damage the winter wheat enough that it's going to eventually die, right? It may fight a little bit, but it's going to die. Your beans are going to push past it. So he did it. And I got this call from him, like a day later, and he's like, Leighton, I have all these clumps in my soil. It's not like dusty and it doesn't fall through my fingers. I go, those are aggregates. That's a great thing, right? Yeah. And I said, what else you see? He goes, well, like all these worms now. Oh, dude, we're doing it, man. We're doing it. I go, those wormholes are going to let the rains, any that you get, sink it down into the soil, and your roots are going to find it. So even if it doesn't rain, you're going to survive. And he got all excited, and the next thing I know, he said, oh, my neighbor's here. I got to go. So he hung up. His neighbor's an 88-year-old or late 80s farmer who's been farming that area since he was knee-high to his grandfather or his father. And when he looked at the soil, he's like, I have never seen an earthworm in my life. And he goes, you have a lot of them, and they're all different sizes. And so Kyle calls me back and goes, hey, my neighbor said there's never been worms here before, and we have all different sizes. What does that mean? I'm like, that means they're friggin' breeding. You brought the cycle back.
Right.
And people don't understand that can be done. He did that in about two years.
Wow.
And now he has soil he can bury his hands, all the way up to his wrist in. Whereas before you couldn't even get your finger in it. You couldn't even penetrate this.
Right.
And that's to me, that's soil health right there.
Mm-hmm.
So, these kinds of conversations are really inspiring for people who are, moving to a new place or starting to homestead and, really struggling to figure out, well, where do you even start? And it's daunting. I mean, you want to have animals, you want to have, crops, you want to have rotating crops that you can, both harvest in the late fall, the early fall, some in the summer, because you need to have, a constant set of food and fruits, right? Let's not forget the fruit trees.
Yep.
So again, it all starts with, all right, where do you start? Well, you start with the soil, right? That's where you start. And you got to build soil structure. And the only way to do that is through the microbes and through, magnetism. The microbes will create getting those clay platelets to stand upright instead of lay flat on top of each other. Mm-hmm. And so, these kinds of conversations are wonderful because we're touching on chemistry, biology, weather formation, and how to really ensure that you're going to be able to move through whatever's coming next. Because we're in a very, very interesting time in life.
Well, an interesting thing, you were saying how the heat forms all those convections, but, at night, almost the exact opposite happens. It'll be a lot colder on a bare soil because you don't have the residue to maintain that, kind of keep it in balance. So it'll be a lot hotter during the day, but at night it'll be a lot colder. And that's really hard on your microbes. They like to stay in a little bit more of a narrower range, and they'll thrive a lot better. So when you don't have any residue, it's just like a bare rock. When you go to the desert, you know, they always talk about how hot it gets during the day, but they also talk about how cold it gets during the night. And that's everything's out of balance.
Yeah, and you know, let's face it. I mean, interesting story. When they went to build Biosphere 2, I don't know if you ever heard about Biosphere 2.
Yes. Yep.
So they had a choice to bring in soils from anywhere on the planet.
Okay.
Different, you know, microcosms within it, because they had a savanna, they had a rainforest, they had a prairie, they had a ocean, and freshwater, you know, streams running through it. And I believe they had a Sonora desert as well. Mm-hmm. And so after they, you know, started looking around at what type of soils they wanted, they actually ended up using desert soil, which to me was very fascinating. And I dug deep on this because that whole thing just blew me away. I remember when they first discussed it in Popular Science as this future project they were going to do. So I followed it all the way through. I mean, even in high school, I was nerding out when they built it. Everyone thought I was nuts, right? I was like, no, this is the coolest experiment. This is like, can we actually colonize another planet? This is going to be key to doing it.
Yes.
And so when I first heard about that, I was actually working with a professor down in U of A, University of Arizona. And my daughter was actually going to Arizona State, which they're very much rivals, right? So I'd get shit at either campus. But Dr. Fitz, I was like, so tell me this, Fitz. I go, you know, your soil out here was, I tried between Phoenix and Tucson, you know, going through these vast deserts. I go, but I noticed that if I go through and it's, you know, you're having one of your, I forget what they call the rainstorms, not tsunamis. There's a term for it. When the rain,
Monsoon.
Thank you, Ken. So when the monsoons pass through, you know, as I'm driving down to you in the afternoon, and then we work the next day, and then I drive back up to see my daughter before I take off, I see nothing. And then I see the most lush air, you know, soil. All the flowers are blooming, everything's growing. And that was just 24 hours of, you know, before that it got rain. I go, how is that even possible? He goes, because the soil actually forms a crust. So it's a very, very fine crust on the surface of the desert soils. And he goes, right underneath that crust is all the biology and what we call the seed bank. So as soon as the rain breaks that crust up and dissolves it, all those nutrients and minerals become available for the seed bank. And that's what causes the explosion of the plant growth. Yep. And so I was like so fascinated by that I stopped on the way home from another trip to try to see what this crust he was talking about. And sure as shit, it's maybe a 1/4 inch thick tops. And you can see where someone's walked because there's footprints. Like they actually broke the crust. Yep. So I took a whole bunch of the crust, put it in a baggie, and flew back to New England. Because I wanted to bring some down to Rodale and actually microscope it, you know, like get it wet and then watch what happens. Mm-hmm. Amazing what happens. Like protozoa come out like crazy. You got to wait 24 hours. But once you get it into solution, you're not going to see anything. But if you wait 24 hours and you come back and scope it, the amount of life is insane. And I think that, you know, that's the piece that we all miss, is that they're there, but they're not in the right condition. Or we've used a lot of Roundup or synthetic fertilizers. Yeah, we've killed a lot of them. Will they come back? Absolutely. Prey predator theory. Seen it a million times. That is, as long as you let nature come back or force it to come back with a compost extract and getting the soil chemistry in balance. A lot of people don't understand that without the right chemistry, the biology can't form or function to its highest level. If you have calcium solubilizing or potassium solubilizing bacteria, or you don't have them, and you do have the pools in this chemistry in the soil, Well, if there's no bacteria there to solubilize them because you killed them with all your chemicals, then of course it's not going to be plant available. They're not going to be able to solubilize it. So I think, again, having conversations like we're having now about the interactions of all of these pieces of the puzzle are so important to have. And again, will give people at least the right paths to start going down so they don't spend all of their energy chasing the big dream, and they get a chance to start with the first few steps, and then the dream will start to weave itself as they go.
Yeah. Well, probably, 80, maybe as many as 90% of the microbes in the soil are either dead or they're dormant. Okay. And it's when we get that rain or we get, something to wake them up, all of a sudden they just really proliferate until they run out of resources. Usually it's either water or some nutrient or something, rather than they go back to sleep for a while. And awful lot. But even those dead ones have a big, very big important function in the soil, because that's where a lot of our enzymes and amino acids are all tied up in some of those cell walls, and that can be very beneficial. Matter of fact, they've now determined just recently here, they kind of discovered that the soil organic matter everywhere in the world is very similar. Looks almost exactly like the long-term soil organic matter. Come to find out, it's just dead bodies stacked on top of each other. It's mainly microbes. That's where a lot of our long-term humus, it just has to break down, and might take 1,000, 10,000 years. But that's where a lot of our long-term organic matter comes from. That's why it takes so long to build it back up again. But what's really lacking in most of our soils is that active portion. And that's where, when we've got degraded soils like we do now, when we start adding them aerobic bacteria, and that's a lot of time what's missing in our soils, because our soils are so hard and dense. We start getting those back into our soil, and they will open the soil up to let more oxygen in, so that the roots can breathe, basically, and get that oxygen down there for respiration. So we kind of forget how the carbon and oxygen cycle really work. We know that leaves take in carbon dioxide, but we kind of forget that roots have to take in oxygen in order for respiration to use up that. And so, a really important statistic that I always remember is how much carbon or carbon dioxide does it take to get 200 bushel corn? How much carbon do you have to absorb per day in the form of carbon dioxide? And if you want to get 200 bushel corn, and on a daily basis, we need almost 100 pounds of carbon or carbon dioxide coming into the plant. Well, if you were to get that just out of the atmosphere at like 400 parts per million, that would take like 33 to almost 34 cubic acres of air, if you think about that, for every acre of corn. So where's that carbon dioxide coming from? Well, you got to have that good soil structure, and the carbon dioxide level in the soil from those roots bringing in the oxygen from above, it will raise it up to 3,000 to about 10,000 parts per million. And then at night, with the cooling temperatures and the sunlight, we can raise that up to about 20,000 to 30,000 parts per million carbon dioxide. And that is supplying a lot of the carbon dioxide for our plant to get it in a high enough level. Now, what's interesting is after the sun comes up, on most of our soil, within about an hour to an hour and a half, that 20 to 30,000 parts per million is all used up. Most of our photosynthesis occurs somewhat early in the morning. And by time we get to noon, most of the carbon dioxide's already been absorbed. And now we're back to that 400 parts per million. Okay. So if we could just speed that up, or, get more biology in the soil, open our soils up so those roots could have better respiration. That's probably the most important thing about soil compaction is it's not only water infiltration, it's also the gas exchange. And I think we a lot of times forget how important that gas exchange is for life on this planet.
So you hit on something that was really valuable. It's called necromass.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard that term, but necromass is basically the dead bodies, broken strands of DNA, bits and parts and pieces of all different organisms, insects, you name it, right?
Yeah.
And the other piece of how to generate CO2 out of the soil is the fact that the water and the carbon, as the bacteria steal the oxygen, to function, then when they release or how do I say this, consume, there's a byproduct that bonds with the oxygen and creates the CO2. So the microbes actually produce the CO2 underneath the canopy, which makes up the other part of the puzzle that you were talking about. But the other piece of that to discuss is that in the necromass is a tremendous amount of DNA, and DNA can actually help for horizontal gene transfer, other functions within creating microbes, the ability to survive in extreme conditions, to change the pH, to handle, a different type of food source, because what they were eating wasn't here, or if they run out of exudates, how do they stay alive? So, I mean, it really, you're touching on the whole picture now, of why soil health is so important, but all of the different functions and reactions that occur as your soil improves to that ultimate tilth where you can just stuff your hand down it.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to bring up something that we don't talk about too much, too often, but, amino acids, and there's one amino acid that really just got me kind of excited a little bit. And I'm not sure that my German tongue doesn't always say it, but arginine or arginine, I'm not sure what's the proper way to say that, but are you familiar how important arginine is for the soil?
So,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, in soybeans, when we have the bacteria are going to infect the soybeans for so that we can produce nodules. Okay. Yep. And you need to have arginine or arginine in the soil. That's an amino acid to open that root up to root infection. Okay. Now, when you get to grasses like oats and sorghum and corn and probably also soybeans, guess what? We need an amino acid to open those roots up to mycorrhizal infection. Guess what amino acid that is? Arginine or arginine. Okay. And then there's one other way that we use arginine or arginine. I never know how to say that for sure.
I think it's neem.
Neem. Okay. We'll use neem then. Yeah. All right. But when we do rhizophagy, we need Pseudomonas have to infect that root through the root hairs or the root cap. They go in, and when they do that, you have to have arginine in order to open that root up to infection. And with rhizophagy, these bacteria are getting in there. They get inside the cells, and they go around like in a washing machine really, really fast, and they lose their cell wall. And when they do that, they release all these other amino acids, even whole proteins and enzymes that the plant's going to use for growth and also going to use to enhance yield. And then when they're expelled back into the soil. They build up pressure. There's so many of them. What's interesting, it's so rich inside that cell that instead of having two split, one split into two, you'll have one Pseudomonas that maybe was rod shaped, but now it's going to be circular, and it will split into quads. Okay. And it builds up so much pressure that it extends that cell. And that's what becomes your hair roots, is all these cells expanding from this rhizophagy from the Pseudomonas growing, they're expelled in waves back into the soil. And then once they get back into the soil, they grow a cell wall, they'll absorb some more nutrients, and then they can go back on this merry-go-round again if they want to, several times, they tell me. And about 10% of them, though, don't make it. I'm assuming that maybe those are the ones that are maybe a little older, and they'll completely just burst apart inside the plant. And the ones that burst apart are the ones that, my understanding, are the ones that release whole enzymes and whole hormones that will go out through that plant and really stimulate that plant to have more biology. So
you're spot on, dude. It's the key is that the understanding the bacteria have an inner and outer cell wall.
Yes.
The outer cell wall is pure nitrogen. So that getting that nitrogen. Once the bacteria, the Pseudomonas, is allowed to enter into the plant cell, first thing the plant cell does with its enzymes is degrade that outer shell, steal the nitrogen. And then it gets a bonus of all of the cytoplasm between the inner and the outer wall. And then it's only when the plant says, okay, you're too old, I'm not spitting you out, that now it gets the inner, which is the gold mine. Now you're getting what we call the pantry of the cell. And the pantry is all the different micronutrients, enzymes, proteins, all kinds of goodies out of that. That's where, like you said, that's what really blows the plant up. But another piece of the puzzle is that when that Pseudomonas comes out without its outer shell, its potential for biosymbiosis with another cell, another bacteria, is tremendous, because now it doesn't have that protection. So say that Pseudomonas comes in contact with a solubilizer or a degrader or a decomposer, whatever. If the biology agree, or the bacteria that still has its outer shell agrees, it will then allow that one that does not have its outer shell to enter in between its inner and outer shell. And if there's some symbiosis, if there's some relationship where they agree, then the cell that took the other one in actually allows that one to go into the center of the cell where the nucleus is, and turns it into an organelle, an organ. And then when that cell splits or divides, now you have a whole new species, because that organelle that's in the other cell that divided is now becoming a nucleus. Yeah. And now you're talking about like genetic drift.
Yes.
At a pace that we can't even comprehend, but it's so critical in nature, because that's what keeps everything in balance. Like you talk about balance, balance, and everything is evolution. Everything's evolution. It's constantly evolving. So if you're not evolving, if you're not moving in a positive direction, well, you're either going backwards or you're stagnating, but either going backwards or stagnating is not good. It's not beneficial. You're not going to survive as the climate migrates, because I don't care what you believe of climate change or climate evolution, but we know that this planet has been covered with ice.
Yes,
came back
absolutely.
Right? So
for 225 to 250,000 years, we had ice, and then it's in some places in Ohio they say the ice cap was anywhere from a mile to as much as 5 miles high into the atmosphere.
Is that not nuts?
Oh, it is. It's hard to believe that those jets up there were either going to crash into them or could have landed on an ice cap up there. I doubt whether they were flat enough to land, but it's just amazing. That's how we got our clay soils, is all the pressure that we had here in the Midwest to grind it right down, from sand to silt to clay, grind it down. Tremendous pressure.
Yep. Nature is just amazing. It's just,
yes, it is. It is.
And I don't think most humans really take the time to appreciate it, like what this planet has been through, and the fact that we're actually here in this, what I want to call Goldilocks era.
Yes.
That and you know, again, whatever you believe, God put us on the planet. Anunnakis put us on the planet. We were genes floating on an asteroid or a comet or whatever. We're here.
Yeah.
We're here now.
Yes.
And we have this amazing opportunity to,
Mm-hmm.
because of our age, right? If we gone back to like 1850, 1820, 1800s, I think, you know, and knowing what we know now, I think that if we went back in time, we could probably convince humanity to take a different direction and not worship money, but worship the planet. Because the planet gives us everything we need. We don't need money, right?
Yeah.
The only reason we need money is because they forced us to need it. But we had everything that we needed. We just got greedy or got programmed. Or
we definitely needed to take better care of our resources that we have.
Yeah. Imagine how humanity would have evolved.
Yeah.
Right? We would have evolved to a whole nother level. We could probably be superhumans by now.
Yeah.
Like they say that the level of oxygen being produced by the volume of plants back then was like the equivalent to being able to live to 120 or 130.
Is that right?
Yeah, because you would have been so much healthier. You wouldn't have been exposed to any of these GMOs or chemicals or, you know, the animals were healthier. The plants were healthier. Everything was healthier.
Yes.
And so it wasn't until, you know, literally pharmaceuticals really came out of the late early 1900s.
Yes.
They realized they could convert, you know, hydrocarbons into compounds that mimicked, didn't fully work the same way as plants, but they
World War II changed a lot of things, especially with nitrogen and fertilizer, and then all the chemicals that came after World War II.
Which they had to use because they made the plant so sick that it didn't have defenses to fight itself.
Right. They basically were farming, you know, pretty close to organically back then because they didn't have the pesticides like we do today. So, you know, anytime in the 1800s was more of an organic. It's really amazing when you go back and you look at the literature. Cover crops were very a major part of agriculture in the 1900s, 1910, 1920s, even all the way up in the 1930s. They had several books just on cover crops. And it's funny because they're almost exactly the same cover crops we're using today. We got a few more genetics and different varieties a little bit that we messed with, but a lot of what you read back in that time period is exactly the same as what we're doing today. So we've had to relearn some things, I guess. And,
dude, did you ever see that book that was written in the late 1800s that was a staple that every married couple got when they got married? And it had cover crops, companion plants, and how to grow polyculture.
Okay.
So that, you know, you planted potatoes, beets, corn. Three Sisters was one version, but there were so many different versions of how to polyculture. And the result was that you just needed a tiny little plot. You barely had to do anything to maintain it, but you had food not for the whole year. Like literally you were harvesting and eating different things during different seasons, but at the end of the season, you had more than enough to can, to bottle, jar, and put away in your root cellar for the winter. And then you'd live off that all winter long while you were hunkered down. And it's, you know, if you think about it, it's the most insane concept is that we are humans, have everything that we need to survive on this planet, but yet we pay taxes and we have to earn money to get to buy what we should just have. Right? Yeah. Because we were born here. We were born to live on this planet. You know, that I'm sorry, I could have easily gone off on a rant on that one.
Yeah.
Well, we've really covered a lot of things. I think another thing that we should touch base is on the micronutrients. One of the things that people don't understand, and I see a lot of molybdenum. None in the soils. It's been mined, and now molybdenum only needs to be a couple parts per million is fine. That's a decent pool. It probably won't have to be amended ever in your life. But when you get to less than 0.02, which is basically non-detectable, you really can't detect less than 0.02. You're killing your plant's ability to create these enzymes that you're talking about, this protein. So critical for plant function. And the same with copper, same with nickel. We don't even talk about those things.
Right.
And so, let's chop it up a little about how they really help the plant in creating flavonoids and all these enzymes, metabolites that are critical for the plant.
Well, copper's an interesting one because I do a whole presentation just on micronutrients, but copper, a lot of times you'll see corn and it'll have a lot of brace roots. And when you see corn that has, brace roots upon brace roots upon brace roots, you start looking at it, it's got a very thin stalk. And if you take that stalk and split it lengthways, you'll see down at the bottom that it has kind of this brown spot. And that's usually an indication of copper deficiency. Copper is needed to make the enzyme that makes cellulose. And what those brace roots are doing is, you got one set, that I'm not going to say that that's bad, but when you start getting 2 and 3 on top of each other, usually that's an indication of copper deficiency. And that plant is not only trying to add stability, but it's also trying to get in contact with the soil. It's almost like a heart attack, a heart bypass. It's trying to get copper out of the soil. It can't get it through that little brown spot there at the base of the plant. So
are you talking about like aerial roots?
Yeah, the brace roots on corn that you see.
And they're typically red too, aren't they?
They can be different colors. That could be an indication of deficiency in itself. Different colors on corn. A lot of times when we get purple corn, we know that's phosphorus deficiency, and that's something we got to be aware of. The one that I'm really interested in, though, is both iron and magnesium. A lot of times iron is so tied to the nitrogen cycle and to nitrogen synthesis in the plant. You got to have a little bit of iron in order to adequately take up the nitrogen, but iron activates the enzyme that makes for photosynthesis to make the chlorophyll. And magnesium, a lot of people want to reduce their magnesium levels in their soil, but magnesium is a central element to chlorophyll. So it's kind of important that early on in the growing season, you have both adequate iron and magnesium in the soil. And a lot of times we'll see yellow corn and we think that's iron deficiency. It could very well be, nitrogen deficiency. It could very well be iron deficiency, especially when it's cold and wet out. We just don't get enough of the iron. The one that we really just don't understand, though, is magnesium. We don't know how it cycles. There's probably less written on magnesium. Nobody seems to understand. Nobody's taken the time to try to figure that one out. But that one seems to be critical.
Go
ahead. We're going to keep interrupting ourselves.
That's all right. Hey, we'll get through it, man. It's like, we're both so excited to talk about this shit that, you don't get to do this often with most people. They don't understand or haven't gone as deep as you have. But no, look, if you read up on human health, a lot of people are deficient in magnesium. Right. And it causes high blood pressure. It causes all these dysfunctions down the chain. So
it's very important in the nerves and heart. Yeah, everything related to blood. Yes, magnesium is one of those things that a lot of people, when they start having tremors and things like that, and have weakness in their legs, a lot of times that's related to magnesium. The other one that's also interesting, of course, we just went through COVID, and that's zinc. And you remember when everybody couldn't taste and they couldn't smell due to COVID? That's a lack of zinc. And the reason zinc's so important is a lot of our bacteria, and especially like COVID and that, if you got a lack of zinc, the zinc will break down the cell walls of a lot of our bacteria, and so that they don't become so virulent, And so that's something that it's really important to make sure you get enough zinc in there. And of course, then you got to also talk about manganese, which is not magnesium, it's manganese.
Yep.
And the importance of manganese is it's the one that splits the water molecule into hydrogen and OH, which hydroxyl, and that's how we build proteins. So you got to have enough manganese in your soil in order for that plant to be able to build all the proteins. And so, having that mineral nutrition, that micronutrients, they make up less than maybe 2% of all the nutrients, but they control probably 80-90% of a lot of the biological processes that are in there.
Dude, spot on, man. Spot on.
So,
and you can go to get these soil lab tests. You can talk to soil scientists. They don't even touch on these things. They don't touch on how critical these micronutrients are to the overall health and well-being of the plant. All they talk about is NPK, not even calcium. Dude, we shouldn't even say the word NPK. It should be carbon NPK.
Right. Carbon is a big one. That's the one that's the most lacking. I mean, if we want to have higher levels, I mean, they do this commonly in greenhouses. They'll add carbon dioxide. They'll up the carbon dioxide level just to get higher production levels in greenhouses. And carbon is by far, I mean, I alluded to that earlier. We run out of most of our carbon within about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Most of the carbon dioxide in the form of carbon dioxide has been used up. And so then things really slow down throughout the rest of the day.
Unless you have soil health and you have functioning soil and you have understory crops, then that cycle just keeps going, and you create these microclimates underneath the plant that just force the carbon dioxide to go right up the trunk of that. And it's just, we've lost all of this knowledge, and it drives me nuts. But another thing that I definitely want to talk on, I'm backing up, but we'll come back to trace minerals, is those aerial roots. Have you seen the corn or the maize down in Mexico that has those? Roots?
Yes.
They're bright red. Those are actually nitrogen nodules. They're pulling all of the nitrogen out of the air. They got friggin' 6, 7, 8 ears per stalk, and the stalks are 6, 7, 8 feet tall. And we get 1 ear, and maybe Kyle's had crops that had 5 ears, which was unseen. People came from all over the area to see. Nobody had seen 5 friggin' ears. Now, 2 of the ears weren't really big, but 3 good ears came off. And that's all biology, all biology. And
all natural biology.
Dude, he had those red, you call them, I forget, structural roots?
Brace roots.
He had those, but they were bright red. So I started researching, what does that mean? And those, they basically, they touched the soil, but as soon as you put your finger underneath it, it didn't continue into the soil. It just looked like a sack. Now,
a lot of those have like a gluey kind of glaze on them. That
there was definitely glaze on it.
And that's the nitrogen that's dripping off. It's feeding.
It was like a rhizo sheath or rhizo. An aqueous coating on the outside to protect the nitrifying bacteria. Just below the surface of it.
It causes it to be anaerobic, so there's a lack of oxygen. That's why when you look inside of nodules on soybeans, they're always pink. And that's an indication. I didn't know that's what you were getting at, but red or that pink color is an indication that there's a lack of oxygen. And you got to have a lack of oxygen in order for those nitrifying bacteria to grow. So,
And dude, when you cut it and it starts to go from white to freaking dark red in like seconds, that is so cool.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to breed that into, my understanding, they're trying to breed that into the corn. I think they've had a few glitches. I'm not quite sure. I haven't read up on it that much here lately, but there's been a few glitches. I think there might even be a couple varieties out, but it may not be quite living up to expectations yet. They probably got to do a little more research on it. Works very well in Mexico. I know that, where they found that. And I think it was in the mountains somewhere in Mexico where they found this really, really healthy corn, and they weren't fertilizing it.
Well, that's the whole point, dude. They don't want us to have a freaking corn that pulls nitrogen out of the atmosphere, because then we won't need to buy their chemicals. Right.
So, well, today's market, boy, I'll tell you what, farmers really need something, because farmers are really hurting with all the fertilizer in the straits of Hormuz all being tied up,
and Ukraine. That's no joke.
Ukraine, yep.
And we have it, but nobody's allowed to use it. And the farmers, if they try to use biologicals, they can't get farm insurance.
Right.
And if you can't get farm insurance, they're risking their food that year, because if their crop fails and they have no crop insurance, they're out of business. And so they're trapped in this, horrible friggin' system that makes them comply instead of allowing them to transition into regenerative, or even organic for that matter, methodologies using biology. And it's I don't want to say it's conspiracy theory or it's the fix is in on these guys, but you follow the friggin' patterns of what happened to the farmers. Like, you remember Farm Aid, right? All these farmers were now getting pinched by the tractor companies, by the seed companies, by the fertilizer companies. They knew exactly how much money they were going to make, so they upped their prices to let the farmer just get a little piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And kept them that way. It's basically indentured slaves. And then the tipping point happened. It just became too much. They got too greedy, and all these small family farms, they're generational farms, got auctioned off for pennies on the dollar to the big industrial agricultural companies.
And our big problem right now is these data centers, and between the data centers and the windmills, boy, they are really bidding up the price of land to the point where farmers have a hard time. I mean, it's 2, 3, 4 times higher than any farmer can pay for it. So that really makes it tough for anybody new to get into farming, that's for sure. But even if you're already in farming, you really got to have deep pockets to be able to buy farm ground right now. It's just so high.
And the same with leasing. A lot of these guys lease the land because they can't afford it. Right? Because it got bought up by big ag or big investment companies.
And when that price gets that high, they want a certain return on their investment. I know part of the return is the price just keeps going up, but they also want some kind of cash return on that investment. And that's what's getting a lot of farmers in trouble. They're just paying more and more all the time, having to pay more cash rents. We're in a real tight squeeze right now.
And let's not talk about commodities. What they've done to us in the commodities market. Right. And we're definitely in a hard place. And Kyle has actually started growing he took on some cows, some beef.
Okay. Yep.
Because he knows, like, the chances of him being able to continue to farm the way he's farmed his whole life are getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer every year.
Yeah.
And so he's like trying to diversify. He tried growing some hemp until that became an issue. And then he always had chickens, and, again, he's doing 500 acres, but he's also, he's got his farmstead, his house, and his mom and his dad live in the house next to them. So they have a family garden that they take care of. And so he knows, like, the writing is on the wall. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to follow the dots in a line and know that they're going in a direction that's not sustainable. Sooner or later, it's going to come to a crashing halt. Yeah. And he leases his land, thank God, because at some point he would have been forced to sell it, if he could continue to farm. So he hasn't been subject to all the taxes and the other nonsense that's related to owning the land outright. But again, at the end of the day, there's probably going to be a point where, the man that owns the land is going to up the lease to a point where it's, again, not sustainable, or seed's going to become a problem. Like right now, like he wanted to cover crop in clover. The price of clover seeds in Illinois is 3 times the price of clover in Georgia. Right? Because Georgia can't pay as much.
Yeah.
They charge him less. But when you're up there in the cash belt, they want to jack you up. Yeah. And so, that was something I told him. I'm like, well, dude, start reaching out to seed companies down, in Georgia and Alabama and some of the Louisiana, some of the poorer states, and just pay for the seed to get shipped up. He did. They won't do it. They won't ship to him.
Is that right?
Yeah, you have to buy locally. Because they know.
Yeah.
They know that what they're doing to the people, to the farmers.
Yeah.
So they all protect each other. It's kind of like, I don't know if you know anything about the glass industry. The glass industry is super protected. Like, you have to be qualified to be able to buy glass at a wholesale price.
Okay.
And it's totally protected. No one can get in unless you're in, or unless you have someone that got you in. And they control the price that way. And I mean, glass technically should be extremely cheap. It's only the cost of the energy to produce it. And once you get your mills up and running, it's very easy to maintain it. It's like riding a bicycle down a hill. Once everything's going, it's going. There's no resistance. So it only takes a little bit of energy to keep that heat at the same temperature. But once you turn it off, you're screwed. It's going to cost you a fortune to turn it back on again. Mm-hmm. So that's why they run them 24/7. But because they run them 24/7, the price of glass should be super cheap. And it's one of those things. The Rockefeller business model, and that's what's killed us all, especially the middle class here in the U.S. is that business model of profit over product. Right? It used to be you bought a dishwasher and it lasted 50 years. I mean, I can remember my grandparents' dishwasher in my mom's house because it was still perfectly good. She didn't want to buy a new one. And she was smart. I mean, she never replaced it. She sold the house with my grandmother's dishwasher in it.
Yeah. Most of them last about 5 years if you're lucky anymore.
And obsolescence.
Like that. Dishwashers or washing machines, they're designed to last about 5 years, so you got to buy another one.
and look what we're doing to all of our resources.
Yeah.
Strip mining them, making shit that breaks, planned obsolescence, throw it in a friggin' junkyard. I'm telling you, junkyards are going to be gold mines when the fucking shit hits the fan.
Yeah, with all the stuff. Yeah, with all the nutrients. Yeah, with all the metals and plastic and Yep,
unfortunately. And we already have bacteria that could break that plastic down and make different sources of fuel. Mm-hmm. So, those, but again, we're not allowed to do that at an industrial scale because that would disrupt markets that exist that don't want to be disrupted. But, the technology's there, and it's just a matter of, going back to natural and nature's way of doing things and not trying to get, greedy or try to produce more than you need. As long as you're producing what you need, you'll do fine in life. The only problem is that you need money to survive at this point. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't just go off get a prairie stead for free and homestead anymore, which is sad, but unfortunately the truth. So anyway, we're way off topic now. Let's talk about kelp.
Okay.
Kelp is one of my favorite plants. It lives in a amniotic soup. Most people don't understand how mineral rich our oceans actually are. Yep. All they know is you can't drink salt water, and it's not going to be good for you. But all of those salts are holding all those minerals that are getting pulled up by this special plant called kelp or seaweed, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
So I know you've got some experience with it. Let's
A
talk
little bit. I'm the biggest thing about when you get something out of the ocean like that, it's pretty well balanced, and we're getting a lot of even very micro nutrients like iodine and selenium and chromium and things like that. That there's still a lot of debate whether those are essential nutrients, but it seems like whenever we put them on, we put kelp or we put some of these very, very small needed nutrients, micronutrients is what I'd like to call them. They plants seem to thrive from them. They seem to do better. So I think there's things that we're still learning about that. Kelp is a good one. Kelp or the seaweed, any kind of marine extract that you can get, that's considered a biological. Those are another form of biological. You generally have all the living ones, but then you have the non-living ones like the humic acids and the kelp and the sugars and hormones and enzymes, things like that. So those would not be considered living because they're not living organisms, even though they may have came from they might be a byproduct of a living organism. So.
Yeah, again, it's like if you look at the periodic table, there are some that we created, right? Some elements that we created that don't belong there. But the ones that we didn't create are here for a reason. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a plant function, whether it's an animal function, whether it's a mammal function. We do need those in very, very small forms because they are necessary to life. Yeah. And that's, again, why we are so sick as a species is because our food has been degraded, because our soil's been degraded. So we don't get those minerals and vitamins and nutrients that we need that would include fractions of those weird elements like chromium and selenium. But anyway, yeah, so, that, again, spot on is one of the reasons why I love kelp. And a buddy of mine is actually planning to open up a kelp extract in a new form. He's been using biology to break it down. He puts kelp in a 250-gallon tote, top off, fills it up, adds water, and then he puts in a biological inoculant that he makes himself. It's basically a product from his fishery. Okay. It's called fish brew. And
you get fish emulsion then.
Well, no, it's actual biology. So it's fish.
Okay. All right.
It's fish poop. But fish don't really poop, right? They just they excrete things into the water column, organic matter, right? Okay. The other key to living fish mold is that you're getting all of the solubilizers. You're getting potassium solubilizers, calcium solubilizers, all kinds of degraders that live on the outside of the skin. So remember, fish are slimy. Same thing. That slime is a coating, is a rhizosphere that's allowing for anaerobic distraction of minerals on the inside that get into the gills and get into the fish. It's its second stomach, right? And I love talking about, well, prior to mass human expansion was monster migration. So all of the organisms that were in the ocean were coming up on the shore on ducks' feet or on animals crashing through the creek or through the river or taking a swim in the lake. All of those organisms were coming up on the land, and every time it rained, all of those terrestrial organisms were getting introduced into the aquatic environment. So there was a constant exchange. Dude, there's this woman, Mia. I can't wait to get her on this podcast. I've been trying for years, but she's been going through some stuff. She actually discovered entire biome, an air biome that was formed on smoke from the wildfires in California. She was up in San Francisco and did a PhD on studying smoke and ash. And what she found that there's bacteria, fungi, protozoa, spores, all kinds of yeasts and molds which are the foundation of the fungal kingdom, that were traveling in the ash and in the smoke. And so if you think about an unpopulated planet, there were wildfires. They weren't wild. They were basically just keeping the forest floor clean, releasing these things in ash, potash, and other things to allow the seed bank that was indigenous and in hyper or sleep mode to come out and bloom. And so this was like blew my mind away that there was biomes in ash and smoke. And it leads me to the question, and they're starting to talk about it with these extreme fights that are actually living in fire. Think about that, dude. Like right now we know absolutely for sure archaea live in these environments and sulfur vents at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
Tremendous pressure, very limited resources, toxic resources. We know there's bacteria that eat toxic waste and poop out electrons, or digest electrons and poop out other minerals or oxygen. I mean, it's just mind-blowing how little we really know about the overall picture of these bacterial archaea, other higher level protozoa. Like I was talking with Dr. James White, and hopefully I'll get him back on the show. He's been real busy lately. We were talking about the rhizosphagy cycle, but protozoa in that cycle. And I said to him, I said, look, I did this experiment, like this was months ago, where I have a grist. It's a gizzard, right? So ducks have a gizzard where they grind up their seeds, right, before they digest them.
Right.
So I built a mechanical gizzard. I used all different kinds of rocks, different sharp ones, round ones. It basically looks like a glorified cement mixer. And I throw in whatever I want as far as plants are concerned. I throw in the grist, the actual rocks, different sizes, shapes, and I flip it on and add a biological inoculant or sometimes just water. And I created an extract, which I poured through what I call a liquid solid separator. So it's just using gravity to pull the solids out of the water column and let the clean water float back up to the top. And then it goes out to a tank, a storage tank. So I ran it, and then I got sidetracked and started working on a bunch of other stuff. And I went back about 10 days, 2 weeks later. And just because I'm curious always, I took some samples of the liquid from the top that was clear. It had a slight color to it. It's like a very, very light green. And I took some samples from the bottom where the solids had separated out. And I brought them back and I microscoped them. Well, the liquid that was at the top, loaded with flagellates, like millions of flagellates. Like there were so many that I had to send it to Andia for a third-party verification because I wanted to make sure I wasn't seeing shit. And she came back to me and said, yeah, I've never seen anything like that. And she goes, by the way, some of them are actually living on algae because I can see little green chlorophyll inside the protozoa. I'm like, wait a minute. I know algae's alive, but I didn't think protozoa could eat them like a graze on them like a bacteria. And she goes, I didn't either, but I mean, it's pretty obvious what had happened. That the tank had grown some algae on the side of it, and these protozoa were eating them and taking on the chlorophyll. So then I said, all right, well, what was the counts? And it was ridiculous. It was like, billions. And there was no aeration. And they were sitting in a tank, exposed to the sun. There was a lid on it, so it wouldn't evaporate. But there was no aeration. And here they are, happily swimming away 10 to 14 days later and completely surviving. So I called James up and I said, dude, is it possible that flagellates could live in type of some kind of dormancy, like a fish laying eggs in between the cells of the plant? That once that plant started to break down, that those would become active when they hit the soil solution. And he was like, wow, that kind of makes sense because we know like where these protozoas come from, especially in these extremely disturbed soils. is it possible that the plant is holding some kind of pool of the protozoo, of the flagellates? So hopefully he'll come on sometime soon, and we're going to chop it up about that. But he definitely said, I'm gonna spend a couple minutes on that to see what I can find out. And he's got deep resources out there.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a pretty cool find.
Yep. Let me ask you this: have anybody talked much about ionized water or magnetized water or structured water?
Oh, one of my favorite conversations. We've had Gerald Pollock on.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we talked about easy water. We've never formally had someone talk about structured water.
That's basically the same thing. I think it goes by different names. There's so many different. I never knew water was that complicated. We always thought it had 3 states, but there's actually probably at least 4, if not maybe some other states to it too, that have different chemical formations to it. And he'd be the guy, if anybody. But
so there's this dude, Chris Ball, B-A-L-I. Ball.
Okay.
Wrote a paper back, I think it was in the early 2000s, that really took water to a whole nother level. Like you're talking, there's many, many more phases to this than just the 4th phase. And the paper was, in the beginning, it was, and this is a long paper. I think there was like 80 pages or something, a lot. So way more than a typical 14, 20-page white paper.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get into the 50s and 60s page, he's talking a language that you can't understand anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go back and start reading from the beginning again to just get through one page, and then go back to the beginning and read through to get to the 62nd page, and do this repeatedly. Sometimes you only have to go back 20 pages, but it's so complex that it's beyond what I want to call easy, common sense understanding.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Don't get me wrong. It didn't contradict itself. It just kept building on itself to a point where it was like science fiction by the time it was done.
Yeah.
Now that dude, I'd love to get him on, because he took structured water to a whole nother level. And then, there's also like hydrogen, right? Hydrogen's a big part of the water. There are states of hydrogen that we're just starting to discover are different.
Yes.
So there's your lead into, okay, 5th phase, 6th phase of water.
Right.
So yeah, dude, I would love to dive down that rabbit hole. Now we normally break at this point to do questions, and we've got 5 of them. So let's dive through those, and those are, if we get through all those before the 2 hour, we'll get back into the micronutrients.
Okay.
And that's where I get to come back on. Our first one is from Farmer Cheryl. When will these microbes that digest plastics be available to the public, and in what form can we cultivate our own plastic digestion microbes, and how?
Great question, Cheryl. Welcome back to the show. So this is tricky. A lot of the people that are holding or doing the work have patents out the yin yang. So it pretty much started back in, I think the 2nd phase happened at Biosphere 2. There was a bankruptcy that caused Biosphere 2 to get handed to a college. I believe it was like Rutgers or some college on the East Coast to begin with. Like they took over the payments and the cost of operation, and they started losing a lot of money. And so University of Arizona took it over. There was some adjustments they made, like they took some windows out, so it wasn't the perfect biosphere it was, because now it was exposed to the environment or the outside world. But one of the things they did was they replicated the Great Pacific Trash Island in the ocean, because the ocean, they had been left go, and it was just algae. There was no fish left in it. They went, well, come on. So they recreated the Great Garbage Patch in the Pacific Ocean. And what they noticed after a few years was, that the plastic was actually disintegrating. Now, their first thought was, well, it's just breaking down, right? It's falling apart. Kind of like when you leave plastic out in the sun. Same thing will happen. It'll just start breaking apart. Or shatter, actually, is what happens out here after time. But then they did some further work to determine that, oh, wait a minute, there's actually some biological things that are happening. Again, they found it through a slime. So again, it was an anaerobic digestion that was occurring between the plastic and the outer slime coating. And there were specific bacteria that were actually doing it. Then from that, it became clear that, hey, wait a minute, plastics do break down through biological processes. What else can we do? And so that's when, again, I'm not a big fan of, genetically modifying organisms, and I don't know whether they did it through nature or through actual CRISPR technology. But then all of a sudden, year ago, 2 years ago, I started hearing about products that were being produced that created this condition that the bacteria could break the product down. Now, was that a bacterial food? Was that a horizontal gene transfer? Was it a genetically modified organism? There wasn't enough information about it. But then recently, another dude came out with a machine that he shreds plastic, and I think it's a specific type of plastic. It's like a harder plastic, like what you get in your milk bottles or your water jugs. And he grinds it, and then through some enzymatic, but this is kind of like industrial fermentation, so there is something, a yeast, a fungi, a bacteria, I don't know. And then he goes through a process and he creates fuel, actual gasoline that you can put into your car or your motorcycle, whatever. So here again, there are ways to do this, but the people that are doing it are very protective. So my guess is if you wanted to try to duplicate what happened in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch would be a good way to do it. You could actually bury your plastics in a highly aggressive compost pile. A lot of diverse organisms. And then basically pull the plastic out. And if there's a slippery, slimy coating on it, well, underneath that coating is the bacteria that will do the breaking down. Now, again, probably don't have the ability to genetically modify these organisms, but through time, they will naturally modify. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
And I know Wiggle Brew has a process they're using for breaking down the plastic in their system. Yep.
But I forget what he said. His is through heat, right? Isn't he like cooking it and then enzymes?
I can't actually remember. I'd have to go back over that particular show, but they have a process where they're grinding it up, putting it through a particular process, and then feeding it to the worms.
Yep. And Jim, did you want to add something to that?
I was just going to say, whenever you've got slime like that, you're probably in an anaerobic type condition. Yeah. And so probably anaerobic bacteria of some type or organisms, whatever, that are involved with that.
Yeah, and we don't study anaerobes. We very, very little study on anaerobes at this point in time. Yeah, they're probably the most important thing.
Yeah. The foundation of everything, because they started everything, breaking down everything from the base products. That's where our, you mentioned it earlier, the periodic table comes from is what they were breaking out of what they had available to them.
Yeah, and our stomach is anaerobic, and that's why we are so sick, is because we've killed off a lot of the diverse species that would be eating these toxins down.
Yeah. So the next question it's more of a question for you, Leighton. It's about your chorus. How often you talked about your hugelkultur, and I basically put up that it's in the description is the link where you can purchase Leighton's chorus, It says right on there, Leighton's Chorus, and it gives the link. But I want you guys to put in hashtag biology, and we'll give his chorus away today. We haven't done it for a while. So put in hashtag biology into the live chat, and at the end of the show, we'll give Leighton's chorus away. So, Tom, you have a chance to win the chorus if you put in hashtag biology.
So what I would recommend, Tom, is that you study berms and swales, because what you want to do is sink that rainwater on those hills. So you create these channels, what we call, swales, and then you do what's called a dam check or check dam, where you use hugelkultur logs and earthen berms to build these little stops. So the water flows and then hits this dam, and it goes over the top and it flows and hits the next dam. And then in that swale, you plant grasses, indigenous would be ideal, flowers, pollinators. And those plants actually help slow that water down as well. That's the way to really permaculture hilly sides. And you can grow anything in the channels. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can grow food in there for all I care. It doesn't matter. As long as you don't have what I want to call a rainy season that would just, anaerobically kill all the plants. And maybe you figure out like how much water actually flows in it, and you plant the gardens right at the edge of the water flow. You'll see that around rivers. Every time you see a river, you see an incredible flush of grasses and understory and trees and everything else. Typically, when you're flying, that's how you know there's water there. It's because these rows of trees that are going all over the place. So that's one approach. And then the other approach is understanding true hugelkultur. Nobody dug a hole and buried the logs. They would take rotten, hunky wood that you could break apart or stick your finger in, but was still strong enough you could move it. Drag it to a certain place, stack them up, throw dirt on them, and then plant on top of that, and then cover the seeds with some form of organic matter, just so the birds didn't eat them all. Then they left, and they let nature work as the water, because that soil was disturbed, the water from the rain would get through the soil, hit those punky logs, and the punky logs would store all that water and soak it up like a sponge, and then release it back to the plants as they requested it or needed it. So when the germads moved back to their summer camp, the food was already there. And they did the reverse in the winter camp, because they'd always migrate to a warmer area for the winter. So as they left that winter camp, went for the summer camp, they built a hugel pot. So everything is above ground. This is where most people screw up. They dig a hole, and then they bury it. Now you got an anaerobic mess. You created a swamp, it's not bad, but you're not going to do well planting on top of a swamp. Things are going to die because it's anaerobic. So yeah, it brings back salamanders and frogs and some other anaerobic thriving organisms, but not good to plant on.
Okay, you had something to add to that, Jim?
Yeah, by all means.
No, that's I've heard of those. Haven't studied them too much, so it's pretty new to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way they, they weren't stupid back then. They didn't have a lot of resources, so they did things that made a lot of sense for their environment. So they didn't have to travel with food. The food was already there.
Yeah.
Our next question from Farmer Cheryl. Should we grow and dig up potatoes? How does that impact the soil? Like we were talking about, not working up the soil.
So I saw this one farmer. I was really impressed. He basically just put the potatoes on the surface of the soil and then covered them with hay and chips.
Yep.
And then his harvest was easy peasy.
Yep.
Jim, you want to talk a little on this one?
Well, you basically summed it up. Hay, straw, chips like that. You can just lay them right on top of the soil, spread them out, and just cover them up, and they do quite well. Yeah,
and the beauty is you're building soil, because all you do is take a pitchfork, get to the top of the old soil, scoop it up, the potatoes come with it, And what
Yep.
falls back down is organic matter for next year's crop.
Right. Right.
So you're getting potatoes and you're building soil at the same time. That's the way we should be farming.
Yeah. Well, and I know when I was growing up, all the farmers, they would take, a quarter section every year and leave it to grow for the year. They wouldn't plant anything on it. They let it rest for that year. Then they'd work that organic material back into the soil for the next spring. So they weren't losing and losing and losing. They were bringing it back by laying it fallow for a season.
They used to call that green manure. That's
Yeah.
what they call it. Yeah, that was the term.
And they actually make seed mixes that they call green manure nowadays. But again, it's for following or for cover cropping or off-season planting.
Keeping that organic matter in the soil where it has to be or where we need it to be.
Yeah.
Where it should be.
Now, Farmer Cheryl again, in the desert where you can't keep the soil covered all the time, the crust serves as the soil covering. Is that correct?
Oh, Cheryl, you got to see this, man. Someday, go out to, Arizona, New Mexico, not as much, but Arizona, you could definitely see this, especially between Phoenix and Tucson. The main road, you can just pull off the highway, and within 20 feet of the edge of the highway, you can walk in, and you'll see your foot sink. You'll leave footprints like in walking in 2 inches of snow. And that crust, you can pick it up with your fingers, and it actually has an aroma, kind of like a little perfume to it, kind of like when the rain hits the hot tar on a sunny summer day. It has just a fraction of that powerful smell. It's special, man. I can't stress enough how cool, Mother Nature takes care of herself. It's like the bacteria excrete a biofilm to bond the particles together to hold them in place to protect them from getting, oxidized. So, nature's just amazing when we let her do her thing.
If we let her do her thing.
Yep.
So Farmer Cheryl again, she's loaded with questions today. Is market gardening a good model to grow more on less land to yield big bucks?
So I'm assuming you're creating your market first and then growing whatever your market demands, like a CSA, right? So you interview people, hey, if I grow organic vegetables for you, what do you want? What are your favorites, or what are you looking for? And obviously you got to tell them, well, this only grows in this season. This we can't harvest till fall. So you create a shopping list for them. And so I think that's what you're saying. So that goes back to polyculture. So you're growing potatoes and carrots underneath, a thinned out overstory of something, whether it's a fruit tree or, corn's a little heavy, unless you space them out in a way that allows the sunlight to penetrate. But that's the way they did it in the 1800s. They did polyculture. It's a little tricky because you got to understand certain plants aren't going to like each other. Great story. A friend of mine used to grow ghost chili peppers next to his tomato plants. And he made the best spaghetti sauce you can imagine. It had a wonderful spin to it. It just didn't sting you. He would take the ghost peppers and make other stuff with them, but the tomatoes by themselves, he didn't add any ghost peppers in it. And it just had this amazing heat that wasn't too hot, but the spice was just wonderful in the spaghetti. So there's another example of offering somebody a plant or a tomato that they can't get anywhere else. That creates a market, that creates a demand. So here again, you're growing them right next to each other. So they're not competing for sunlight, but they're giving each other benefits. So again, you'll have to do a little research on it. But yeah, that would be my recommendation, is polyculture as a way to, move into a high yield, low square foot garden.
Well, I know that years ago there was a gentleman named Curtis Stone. He's still on YouTube. You go back to some of his earlier videos, and he was taking city lots, pulling the grass off, putting high impact gardens in, and growing for local restaurants, farmers markets, etc. in a very, on a city lot, and he was making 100,000 a year doing that. So that's somebody you can research going back a few years. He's more political and stuff like that nowadays. But if you go back to his earlier videos, that's all it was on growing on, city lots and how he was doing it and making a significant amount of money from doing that.
The only caveat to that is you really got to be careful. Like in New York soils, they're so toxic. There's so much lead. There's so much petroleum, so much heavy metals that the plants will uptake. So just know your soil, know your environment before you grow food for other people. And we actually had a cat on here a couple of times, Joshua, Josh and his wife.
Julian?
Yes. They were doing that in Arizona. Remember he was talking
about Sonnenbergs, right?
Yeah. They were doing it in abandoned lots in Arizona. They had to get permission from the town. They had to get a water source. They brought in chips and they created these, vacant lot gardens and were selling all of the vegetables in the farmer's market on the weekends and making a comfortable living. And that's how he saved up enough money to buy his plot of land up in the mountains, which is gorgeous to say the least. He's got year-round creek running behind his house. So he's got aquatic water that floods in the spring, brings all those silt and minerals from the crashing rocks, washing up onto its shore. That place is really special, and he's got an Airbnb there too. So you should look him up in the past. I forget what was his title. Did he have a specific?
I can't remember, but I reached out to him. He's probably going to be coming on next month to bring us back up to date on how his farm is doing there.
Sweet. That'll be a fun one.
Yep. So our last question here from Serena, when starting a worm bin, how much should be dead leaves, coffee grounds, or vegetable scraps, and how much go below the worms and on top?
Great question. All right. So you need to give them a home first. So yes, leaves are important, but you don't want just leaves. Ideally you want compost and not commercial compost, something that is more of a boutique compost. As far as the food does not go underneath. The food goes on top always. And ideally you only cover half of the worm bin with food and leave the other half open so you can check the condition of the worms without screwing around, putting your hand in stinky food. And then let that food disappear and then cover the other half. And I'm talking maybe an inch and a half of food so they can work their way up into it and then go back down into their bedding. Moisture is critical. It can't be soaking wet because it'll go anaerobic and stinky on you. You get all these flies and have all kinds of problems. But it has to be moist enough that they're in a comfortable environment that doesn't let them dry out. The easiest way to kill worms is anaerobic, soaking wet, sopping wet, or too dry, bone dry. They die. They're gone. Yeah. So worm bins are tricky. Ideally, my buddy Richard had the best system I've ever seen in my life. He called it wilding vermicompost. He'd basically go to a local organic farm. He'd put a ring of hay bales around it. He'd throw some compost in the middle, like a little volcano that came to the edges of the hay bales. And he told the farmer, just throw everything at the mountain. And some of it would stick in the hill and some of it would roll down and build up around the base between the hay and the edge of the compost. But everything was aerobic, and the worms could go out and eat the fruit and then go back into the compost at night. and then he'd go back at the end of the season and bag it all up, and he didn't do anything. So if you have access to that, then go that route. If you're just trying to vermicompost your own kitchen scraps, half covered, half not, once that other half is disintegrated and gone, then feed the half that you didn't have the food on the last time. That's the safest way to vermicompost it.
Yeah. And starting with the compost is really a good foundation, making good compost, and then adding the worms into that, letting them eat through. And Leighton, you're very right on, moving the food, and depending on the amount of worms you have, it can take up to a week for them to go through the amount of food you're putting down. But you can literally move worms across your worm bin, because they will follow the food and move right across your bin, and eat as you go. And what you have left is, the black gold, as we call it, the worm castings. But worm bins can be easy, but do some research. There's, a lot of people that grind up everything before they put it in. The smaller the particles, the easier it is for the worms to go through it. And remember, they're not eating a leaf. They're eating the biology that exists that's breaking down that leaf. So don't expect them to eat it through the apple very quickly, but if you mash the apple up, they'll use it that much faster.
Or cut it in half and put the two halves down so they can mine right into the fruit. They don't have to go through the skin.
Yeah.
But aeration is important too. So if you want to mix some leaves in, great. I would suggest you mix in some punky old wood chips. So go along the highway and look for where they just chip it and shoot it off into the woods, and collect some of those wood chips, because that creates a nice fungally dominant worm castings, and it creates aeration in soil structure. And coffee grounds, be careful. They're both the green and the brown, so you don't want to do too much of them. Tea is less of a concern than coffee, but no tea bags. Just take the tea out of it.
A lot of worms love pumpkins, pumpkins and watermelon, muskmelon, and anything sweet. They always say the bigger the worm, that's when they become basically sexually active. It's size, not how old they are. And the better you feed them, the fatter you get them, and the better they eat, the quicker they'll have babies. And that's if you're trying to get more worms out there.
Yep, absolutely right. And again, those hard shells, any like pumpkins, watermelons, whatever, cut them in half and put the juicy part down, and they'll go up in there to have an orgy. Like I know people that will add in minerals, like mineral powders and rock dust, because they do have a gizzard, and so they're eating through the watermelon, and they're actually getting little tiny pieces of ground up stone that helps them process some of the stuff that does get in. That's not just bacteria.
Yeah.
So worm health is critical.
It's like the gizzard that you've made, Leighton, that you were talking about how much protozoa was in the water. It's that grinding mass that breaks everything up and breaks the cells apart.
Yep, agreed. 100%.
So we finally had Tom finally came back on and put his number in. So we're going to do this draw really quick. We only had 3 you guys actually put in #biology, but let's see if Tom's going to get the chorus.
Serena. Better luck next time, Tom.
Serena, you'll have to reach out to It's All About the Biology at gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with Perky, who was on last week, who's the one that will set you up with the chorus. And Jim, we had lots of people going, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank
Tom,
you for having me.
Really appreciate the 2 hours, my friend. It was so much fun to really go all over the map, biogeochemical phase of soil and soil health. So appreciate your time, my friend. And Ken, as always, thank you so much for all the behind the scenes work of making this happen every week. And appreciate and much love, brother.
You bet. And next week, guys, we have Luna with Tom coming back on to hash it up with Leighton. And she talks a lot about the amino acids, etc. So you guys are going to want to check that. And of course, Wednesday is Andy and I. If he's feeling better, we'll be on Wednesday. We have the ladies, the chiropractors are sexy on Thursday. So if you're into human health and how our bodies work, you'll want to check that out on Thursday as well. But everybody, thank you very much. Love you all, and we will see you guys soon.
Serena, you email Ken. It's all about the biology. That's what you do. Okay?
Yep.
Peace out, everybody.